The wedding reception was a vision of perfection. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly decorated tables, and the hum of laughter mixed with the clink of glasses as the guests celebrated the newlyweds. Nathan, the groom, sat at the head table beside his glowing bride, unaware that the night would take a dark, life-altering turn. During the toasts, Linda, Nathan's mother, rose with her champagne glass in hand. She exuded poise, her crimson dress drawing approving glances. Her husband, Martin, shifted uneasily in his chair, his face unreadable. "I have a few words to say about love," Linda began, her voice steady. "Love is a choice, commitment, and sometimes a test." Her eyes swept the room, briefly locking with Martin's before softening as they fell on her son. "Nathan," she continued, "you've always been a source of pride for me. Watching you grow into the man you are today has been a privilege. And seeing the love you and Emma share reminds me of the promises Martin and I made to each other all those years ago." Martin's knuckles whitened around his glass. He leaned forward, his mouth opening slightly as if to interrupt, but Linda's commanding voice held the room captive. "Marriage isn't just about sharing joy," she said. "It's also about enduring heartbreak, facing betrayals." The guests stirred uncomfortably, their polite smiles faltering. "And speaking of betrayals," Linda added, her voice hardening, "this might be the perfect time to introduce someone who should have been here tonight, Martin's other son." The room froze. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a breaking wave. Nathan's head snapped toward his father, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Martin," Linda said, turning her piercing gaze to her husband. "For years, I've kept your secret, protected your image for the sake of our family. But tonight, I won't stay silent anymore. Not when our son deserves the truth." Linda gestured toward the back of the room. A young man, no older than 20, stepped forward hesitantly. His resemblance to Martin was striking. Same sharp jawline, same steely gray eyes. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Meet Liam," Linda said coldly. "Your half-brother. The product of Martin's long-standing affair with our neighbor." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Martin shot up from his chair, his face flushed with anger and panic. "Linda, stop!" he barked, his voice cracking. "No," she snapped. "You've lied to this family for years. You've lied to me. You've lied to Nathan. And on this day of all days, I won't let you play the devoted father while Liam watches from the shadows." Nathan's face twisted in disbelief. "Dad? Is this true?" he demanded, his voice rising. Martin stammered, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. The guests murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads in shock, others openly gaping at the scene. It's complicated," Martin began, but Linda cut him off. "Complicated?" she hissed. "You've destroyed trust in this family, all while pretending to be the perfect husband and father." Emma clutched Nathan's arm, her wide eyes darting between the unfolding drama and her husband's stricken face. "I didn't want to ruin your day," Linda said, her voice softening as she turned back to Nathan. "But I couldn't let you begin this new chapter of your life under a lie. You deserve better than that." Martin slumped into his chair, defeated. The crowd buzzed with whispers, the joyous celebration irreversibly tainted by the revelation. Nathan stared at Liam, his jaw tight. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice raw. Liam hesitated, glancing at Martin before meeting Nathan's eyes. "I didn't know how," he admitted. "I didn't want to hurt you." The wedding toast had ended, but the scars it left would linger far longer than the memories of the celebration. The aftermath of Linda's bombshell unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. The festive air evaporated, replaced by a suffocating tension that gripped every corner of the reception hall. Guests shifted awkwardly, some whispering among themselves, others pretending not to eavesdrop on the family unraveling before them. Nathan pushed back his chair, the sound scraping through the uneasy silence. His eyes, glassy with unshed tears, locked onto his father. "You lied to me my entire life," he said, his voice low and quivering with suppressed rage. To all of us. Martin raised a hand as if to placate him, but the gesture only fueled Nathan's anger. Don't. Just don't. Nathan snapped, his tone sharper now. You betrayed Mom, and you let me grow up thinking you were someone to admire. You're a fraud. Linda, her face now pale, seemed both vindicated and drained. You don't owe him forgiveness, Nathan, she murmured. He made his choices. Martin looked desperately at Liam, then at the guests. The weight of their collective judgment bore down on him. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, he muttered. Oh, Linda cut in, her voice laced with venom. When was the right time, Martin? After another decade of lies? After you played the doting father at another wedding? Emma, still clutching Nathan's arm, finally spoke. Maybe we should take this somewhere private, she urged, glancing nervously at the guests. But Nathan shook his head, his jaw set. No. Everyone here deserves to see what kind of man he really is. His voice cracked, and for a moment, his fury gave way to heartbreak. You were supposed to be my role model, someone I could trust. And now, on my wedding day of all days, I find out you've been hiding another family. It wasn't like that, Martin pleaded. Liam wasn't a secret because I didn't care. It was complicated. I didn't know how to... Don't you dare blame this on the situation, Linda interjected, her voice rising. You knew exactly what you were doing every time you snuck next door. Liam shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders hunched. I didn't come here to cause trouble, he said softly. His words hung in the air, but they did little to calm the storm. Nathan turned to his newly discovered half-brother, his expression a mixture of resentment and pity. What do you want from me? He asked bluntly. Liam hesitated, glancing at Martin before replying. Nothing. I just wanted to meet you. I'm sorry it had to happen like this. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. He turned on his heel, pulling Emma with him. I'm done with this circus. As he stormed toward the exit, Emma looked back at Linda, silently asking if she should intervene. Linda gave a subtle shake of her head. Some wounds needed time before they could begin to heal. Martin slumped in his chair, the man who had once commanded respect now looking small and broken. Guests began to shuffle toward the doors, the party well and truly over. Linda remained standing, her gaze fixed on Martin. This is your legacy, she said quietly, the venom in her voice replaced by weary resignation. I hope it was worth it. She turned and walked away, leaving Martin alone at the head table, a man drowning in the wreckage of his own choices. The days following the disastrous wedding were a blur of strained conversations and unanswered calls. Nathan, overwhelmed by the betrayal and chaos, retreated into silence. Emma stayed close but gave him space, knowing this wasn't her pain to heal. Linda remained stoic, her role as the truth-teller both liberating and isolating. And Martin, he vanished, avoiding the home he had once shared with his family, seeking solace in anonymity. Nathan sat alone in his small apartment, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. His wedding suit, still draped over a chair, served as a bitter reminder of the night his world shattered. His phone buzzed, a message from Liam. I'm sorry for everything. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Nathan stared at the screen, torn between anger and curiosity. His emotions were a storm, unrelenting and chaotic. Against his better judgment, he replied. Meet me at the Grove tomorrow. Noon. The next day, Nathan arrived at the quiet park. He found Liam sitting on a bench, nervously fidgeting with his hands. As Nathan approached, Liam stood, his expression a mix of relief and apprehension. Hey! Liam started, his voice tentative. Why'd you come to the wedding? Nathan asked bluntly, skipping pleasantries. What were you hoping for? Liam hesitated. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to see you. To know you. Know me? Nathan scoffed. You've had years to reach out. Why now? I didn't know how, Liam admitted, his gaze dropping to the ground. I didn't even know if you knew about me. I thought, maybe if I came, I could at least be there. Even if you never found out. Nathan's jaw tightened. Well, now I know. So what? Are we supposed to be brothers? Start playing catch in the park. Liam flinched at the bitterness in Nathan's voice but didn't back down. I don't expect anything from you, he said quietly. But I needed to try. I'm not responsible for what our dad did. But I'm still part of this mess. And so are you. Nathan stared at him, the truth of those words sinking in. For all his anger at Martin, Liam wasn't the villain. He was a byproduct of betrayal, just as much a victim of Martin's selfishness as the rest of them. Do you even know him? Nathan asked, his voice softer now. What's he like? When he's with you? Liam's expression darkened. Not much different than what you saw at the wedding. A lot of promises. Not much follow-through. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. Sounds about right. The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared pain binding them in an uneasy truce. What happens now? Liam asked finally. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I need time. Space from all this. Liam nodded, understanding. If you ever want to talk again, I'm here. Nathan gave a slight nod, though he wasn't sure if or when he'd take Liam up on the offer. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything, this wasn't the end of the story. Meanwhile, Linda sat in the living room of her quiet house, sipping tea and staring out the window. She hadn't heard from Martin since the wedding. Part of her felt relieved. Another part couldn't help but wonder what he would do next. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Martin standing there, disheveled and weary. I need to talk, he said simply. Linda stared at him, her emotions a swirl of anger, pity, and lingering affection. She stepped aside, letting him in, but her icy silence told him this wasn't a homecoming. I know I've ruined everything, Martin began, his voice heavy, but I want to make things right. Linda raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a bitter smile. And what does right look like to you, Martin? Erasing the past? Pretending none of this happened? No, he said firmly. I can't fix the past, but I can try to be honest moving forward. For Nathan, for Liam, for you. Linda let out a humorless laugh. Honesty, that's rich, coming from you. I mean it, Martin insisted. I'm done hiding. Linda's eyes narrowed. You should have been done years ago. The damage is done, Martin. And some things can't be repaired. He nodded, accepting the harsh truth. Maybe not, but I have to try. Linda didn't respond. She simply walked back to her chair and sat down, leaving him standing there like an unwelcome guest in his own life. The silence stretched between them, fraught with all the words left unsaid. The weeks that followed were a cautious wade through turbulent waters for everyone involved. Nathan maintained his distance from his parents, but found himself occasionally exchanging texts with Liam. Short messages. Neutral. Nothing too revealing. Yet, in those small exchanges there was a tentative sense of connection. Linda, however, was not as idle. She had always been meticulous, whether in her career, her role as a mother, or as a wife keeping a fragile family together. But now, she channeled that same focus into untangling the threads of Martin's deceit. She consulted a lawyer, explored their finances, and meticulously planned her next steps. She wasn't going to allow herself to remain a pawn in Martin's game. One quiet evening, she received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line simply read, "The truth about Martin." She hesitated, her finger hovering over the mouse, before clicking. The email was brief but devastating. Asterisk Linda, Martin has more secrets than you know. His relationship with your neighbor wasn't just an affair. He's been siphoning money to her for years. Thought you should know. A concerned friend. Asterisk attached were bank statements and transaction records. Linda's stomach churned as she scrolled through the damning evidence. Thousands of dollars, funneled over decades, to an account linked to their neighbor, the mother of Liam. Her hands shook as she closed the laptop. She poured herself a drink, then sat in the dark, the liquid burning her throat as her mind raced. If she had hoped for a reason to let Martin back into her life, this wasn't it. Nathan's phone buzzed as he sat on the edge of his bed. It was Linda. He hesitated before answering. "Mom," he said, keeping his tone guarded. "Nathan," she replied, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I need to tell you something. About your father." He exhaled sharply. "What now?" She told him about the email about the money. As she spoke, her voice grew steadier, tinged with righteous anger. Nathan listened in stunned silence. When she finished, he let out a bitter laugh. "So he wasn't just a cheater. He's a thief too." "It's more than that," Linda said. "This isn't just about me. It's about you, about your future. Everything he's built has been on lies, Nathan. And I'm not letting him get away with it." "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "I'm filing for divorce," she said simply. "And I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, with a surprising hint of solidarity, he said, "Good." The next morning, Linda's lawyer filed the papers. The news spread quickly through their social circle, the scandal reigniting whispers that had barely begun to fade since the wedding. Martin, blindsided, called Linda repeatedly, but she didn't answer. When he showed up at the house, she met him at the door, her expression cold and unyielding. "Linda, we can fix this," he pleaded. "No, Martin," she said, her voice like steel. "You can't fix decades of betrayal. And I won't let you drag me down with you." He tried to argue, but she shut the door in his face. Meanwhile, Nathan met Liam at a coffee shop. He'd been turning their conversations over in his mind, trying to make sense of this unwanted connection. But now, with the revelations about Martin's financial betrayal, Nathan felt compelled to seek clarity. "I got some news," Nathan began after they ordered. He told Liam about the money and the divorce. Liam's face fell. "I didn't know about any of that," he said, shaking his head. "My mom never mentioned." "It's not your fault," Nathan interrupted. He surprised himself with how genuine the words sounded. "It's not your fault your mom was part of this. And it's not your fault Martin's." "Martin." Liam nodded slowly, looking relieved but still uncertain. "Do you think there's any chance of making things normal between us?" Nathan thought for a long moment. "I don't know if normal is in the cards, but maybe we can figure out something better than this." Liam smiled faintly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back at home, Linda stood at the window watching the sunset. She felt the weight of the past weeks pressing down on her, but also a strange sense of freedom. The truth was painful, yes, but it had released her from the illusion of her marriage. Now she could rebuild not just for herself but for Nathan. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she raised her glass, a quiet toast to the woman she was becoming. Strong, resolute, and unafraid of the truth. Martin sat in a dingy motel room on the edge of town, the muted hum of the freeway outside matching the dull roar in his head. The blinds were half closed, casting broken stripes of light across the cramped room. He had spent the past week bouncing between regret, anger, and despair, replaying the fallout from the wedding and Linda's cold rejection. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from an unknown number. *, meet me. We need to talk. *, he frowned, typing back a terse response. Who is this? The reply came instantly. It's Claire. Claire. The name brought a rush of memories. The neighbor, Liam's mother. She hadn't contacted him since the wedding, and her sudden reappearance filled him with unease. He stared at the screen before finally typing, "Where?" The coffee shop where they met was quiet, tucked away in an older part of town. Martin arrived first, scanning the room nervously. Claire walked in moments later, her face drawn, her expression unreadable. She slid into the seat across from him without a word. "Claire," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't," she said sharply. "I'm not here to listen to excuses." Martin leaned back, his mouth clamping shut. He waited, sensing that whatever she had to say, it wasn't going to be pleasant. "You've dragged me and Liam into your mess," she said, her voice low but steady. "And now Linda knows about the money. Do you realize what you've done?" "I didn't tell her," Martin protested. "She found out on her own." "That doesn't make it better," Claire shot back. "You think Linda's going to stop at divorce? She's coming after everything, Martin. And if she digs deep enough, she'll find more." Martin's face paled. He knew exactly what Claire was referring to. Years of poorly hidden financial indiscretions, shady deals, and cover-ups. He thought he'd been careful, but Linda's meticulous nature was a force he couldn't underestimate. "She won't find anything," he said, more to himself than to her. Claire gave a bitter laugh. "You don't believe that any more than I do. You always thought you could control everything. But look at you now. You've lost your family, your reputation, and soon your money." Martin's fists clenched on the table. "What do you want from me, Claire? To apologize? To make things right? Because I can't." "I don't want your apologies," Claire said coldly. "I want you to fix this before it destroys Liam." The mention of Liam softened Martin's expression. "I never wanted this to hurt him," he said quietly. "I was trying to protect him." Claire leaned in, her eyes flashing. "Then do it now. Protect him by owning up to what you've done. Don't let him pay for your mistakes." Meanwhile, Linda sat with her lawyer in a spacious downtown office, the skyline sprawling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Papers were spread across the desk. Financial records, affidavits, and plans for the divorce proceedings. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for being ruthless, leaned back in her chair. "We can push for a full investigation into his finances," the lawyer said. "Given what you've provided, there's enough to pursue charges if it comes to that." Linda nodded slowly. The idea of seeing Martin held accountable was appealing, but she hesitated. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about setting things right for her and Nathan. "What happens if he tries to fight it?" she asked. "He won't win," the lawyer replied confidently. "But it could get messy. Are you prepared for that?" Linda's gaze hardened. "I've lived in a mess for 20 years. I'm ready." Nathan, on the other hand, was trying to focus on rebuilding his own life. But the chaos of his family continued to creep into his thoughts. He and Liam met a few more times, their conversations gradually shifting from stilted exchanges to more genuine interactions. Liam's openness surprised Nathan. He spoke candidly about his struggles, his resentment toward Martin, and his hopes for a normal relationship with his half-brother. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Liam asked, "Do you think we'll ever move past this?" Nathan shrugged. "I don't know, but I think maybe we can figure it out. Eventually." It wasn't a promise, but it was something. And for Liam, it was enough for now. Martin's meeting with Claire ended without resolution. He left the coffee shop feeling more cornered than ever. The walls were closing in, and for the first time he realized there might not be a way out. That night, he sat in his motel room and opened his laptop. He began typing an email, the words spilling out in a rambling confession. He didn't know if he would send it, to Linda, to Nathan, to the world, but writing it was the only way he could confront the enormity of what he'd done. As the clock ticked past midnight, Martin stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the send button. The man who had always controlled the narrative was finally out of options, and for the first time he was terrified. Linda stood in her kitchen, the sharp aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the morning light streaming through the window. She'd always found solace in routine, but these days, even the smallest tasks felt heavy, burdened by the weight of her unraveling life. She reached for her phone, scrolling through emails and messages when a new notification caught her eye. An email from Martin. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen, before opening it. The subject line read, "I need you to know." The words that followed were a mixture of apology, explanation, and desperation. Martin confessed to the affair, the financial deceit, and the guilt that had eaten away at him for years. He painted himself as a man caught in a web of his own making, pleading for understanding, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of the pain he carried. Linda's expression remained stoic as she read, but her heart twisted with conflicting emotions. She wanted to dismiss it as another manipulative attempt to save face, but the rawness in his words gave her pause. She set the phone down, her appetite for breakfast gone. Nathan received the same email that morning. Unlike Linda, his reaction was immediate and visceral. He read the first few lines, then slammed his laptop shut, the anger boiling to the surface again. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the gall Martin had to try and explain it all away, as if words could undo years of damage. Emma watched him from across the room, concern etched on her face. "You okay?" she asked softly. "No," Nathan said bluntly, pacing the room. "He's trying to justify it. Like any of this can be justified." "Maybe it's not about justifying it," Emma offered cautiously. "Maybe he's just trying to own up to it." Nathan stopped, his jaw clenched. "It's too late for that." Across town, Martin sat in the same motel room, staring at his laptop. The emails had been sent, but there was no relief, no catharsis. He felt like a man shouting into a void, his words swallowed by silence. His phone remained ominously still, no responses, no missed calls. He didn't know what he had expected. Redemption? A chance to make amends? Perhaps he was fooling himself. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He opened it to find Linda standing there, her arms crossed and her face a mask of composure. Martin's stomach sank. He stepped aside to let her in. "I read your email," she said, her voice cool and measured. Martin swallowed hard. And I'm not here to forgive you," she said bluntly. "But I have questions. And I think you owe me the truth." Martin nodded, gesturing for her to sit. He fumbled for words as he explained the years of lies, the double life he'd led, and the rationalizations that had allowed him to keep going. Linda listened, her expression unreadable, until he finally stopped. "You want to know the truth?" she said after a long silence. "The truth is, I spent years blaming myself for your distance. I thought I wasn't enough. But now I see it wasn't about me. It was about you, your selfishness, your cowardice." Martin looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I don't hate you," Linda continued, her voice softening slightly, "but I pity you, because you've destroyed everything that mattered in your life. And for what? A lie?" Martin opened his mouth to respond, but Linda raised a hand. "I'm done, Martin. The divorce is happening. The lawyers will handle the rest. I came here for closure, not reconciliation." She stood, her eyes fixed on him one last time. "Goodbye, Martin." And with that, she walked out, leaving Martin alone with the crushing weight of his choices. Nathan wasn't ready to confront Martin directly, but his conversations with Liam had grown more frequent. The two brothers were slowly finding common ground, sharing stories about their lives, their frustrations, and their struggles. For the first time, Nathan began to see Liam not as a symbol of betrayal but as someone caught in the same storm. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the city lights, Nathan turned to Liam. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him," he admitted. "But I think I can forgive you." Liam's eyes widened, and a small, grateful smile broke across his face. "Thanks," he said quietly. "That means a lot." The two sat in silence, the weight of the past still present but slightly lighter. They weren't friends yet, but they were something. Brothers, maybe, or at least the start of it. Linda returned home to an empty house. The silence felt less oppressive now, more like a canvas waiting to be filled. She poured herself a glass of wine and stepped onto the porch, watching the sunset. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that the future was hers to define. As the sky darkened, she raised her glass in a quiet toast to herself, to survival, to resilience, to freedom. Months passed, and the pieces of the shattered family began to settle, though never quite as they had been before. The wedding debacle, once the subject of scandalous gossip, faded from the public eye, but the scars it left remained vivid for those involved. Linda finalized the divorce, emerging from the proceedings with her head held high. The financial investigations revealed the full extent of Martin's duplicity, and though he avoided criminal charges, He left the courtroom stripped of much of his wealth and reputation. Linda, unburdened by pity or regret, focused on building a new life. She sold the family home, moved to a smaller, more modern place, and threw herself into work and volunteer projects. For the first time in years, she felt untethered, a woman in control of her own destiny. Nathan, meanwhile, found himself in unfamiliar emotional territory. His anger toward Martin hadn't entirely dissipated, but it had dulled, replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement of his father's humanity. Through his sporadic conversations with Liam, he began to piece together a fuller picture of Martin. Not the towering figure from his childhood, but a flawed man who had made devastating mistakes. One afternoon, Nathan received an unexpected call from Martin. He hesitated before answering. "Hi, Dad," Nathan said, his tone guarded. "Hi," Martin replied, his voice subdued. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up." Nathan didn't respond, waiting for Martin to continue. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry." Again, Martin began. "I know I've said it before, but I mean it. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope, someday, you can think of me as more than just my mistakes." Nathan sighed. "It's not that simple. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Mom, and Liam, and yourself." "I know," Martin said quietly. I want to try to be better. For whatever time I have left. I want to be here if you'll let me." Nathan thought for a moment, the weight of his father's words sinking in. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," he said honestly. "But I think we can try to start over. Slowly." Martin's breath hitched. "That's all I can ask." Liam, too, found himself at a crossroads. With the truth about his parentage out in the open, he began to build a tentative relationship with Linda. To his surprise, she welcomed him into her life with more grace than he'd expected. They shared coffee dates and occasional dinners, their conversations easing into a rhythm of mutual understanding. "You remind me of Nathan," Linda remarked one evening as they walked through a park. "Not just in how you look, but in your determination." Liam smiled, the compliment warming him. "I guess that's the one good thing Martin gave us." Linda chuckled, though her expression grew thoughtful. "You're not defined by him. Neither of you are. You're your own person, Liam. Don't ever forget that." The family, fractured though it was, began to find new definitions for itself. Nathan and Liam grew closer, their bond deepening with each shared story and inside joke. They weren't brothers in the traditional sense, but they were family. Messy, complicated, and imperfect, but family nonetheless. Linda, watching from the sidelines, felt a flicker of pride. Despite the pain, despite the betrayal, something good had emerged from the wreckage. On a quiet autumn evening, Linda hosted a small dinner at her new home. Nathan and Emma arrived first, followed by Liam. The mood was light, the conversation peppered with laughter. At the end of the meal, Linda raised her glass. "To survival," she said, her voice steady. "And to new beginnings." Nathan clinked his glass against Liam's. "To not letting Martin screw us up any more than he already has." Laughter rippled through the room, a sound of healing and hope. As the evening stretched on, Linda stepped outside, gazing up at the stars. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. Life had been cruel, but it had also given her resilience and the courage to start anew. Inside, the sound of laughter continued, spilling out into the night, a testament to the family they were building from the ashes of what had been. Winter arrived, blanketing the city in a crisp chill and drawing the family further into their new lives. The chaos of the past year had settled, and though the wounds hadn't fully healed, they had begun to scar over. The relationships among Linda, Nathan, and Liam were still a work in progress, but progress nonetheless. One evening, as snowflakes fell in lazy spirals, Nathan decided to visit Linda. He brought Liam with him, a decision that felt natural now, not forced. The two brothers had found a rhythm, and though the history of how they came to know each other still stung, it no longer defined them. Linda greeted them at the door, her face lighting up as they entered. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies and the soft glow of holiday lights. It was smaller than the home they'd grown up in, but Nathan realized it felt more genuine, less like a stage for perfection and more like a sanctuary for authenticity. Over cups of hot chocolate, the three of them talked about everything and nothing. Linda shared a few anecdotes from her volunteer work. Nathan updated her on his plans for a honeymoon he and Emma had finally scheduled, and Liam talked about his part-time job at a local bookstore. It was the kind of conversation families had when life was ordinary, a gift in itself after everything they'd endured. As the night wound down, Nathan excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Linda and Liam alone in the living room. Liam shifted in his seat, glancing at her. "Thanks for letting me be here," he said softly. Linda looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and placed her hand over his. "You belong here," she said simply. "You're part of this family, Liam. That won't change." Liam's throat tightened, and he nodded, unable to find the right words to respond. Linda squeezed his hand before withdrawing, her expression warm and unguarded. Later that night, after Nathan and Liam had left, Linda stood by the window, watching the snow pile up on the quiet street outside. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and saw Martin's name. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice even. "Hi, Linda," Martin said. His voice was subdued, hesitant. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "I'm fine," Linda replied. "And you?" "I'm trying," he said. "It's not easy, but I'm trying to rebuild. I wanted you to know that." Linda didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured but kind. "I hope you find peace, Martin, for your sake and for Nathan and Liam's. But we've moved on." "I understand," he said after a pause. "Take care, Linda." "You too," she replied before hanging up. The call didn't leave her angry or sad, only reflective. She realized she no longer felt the heavy burden of Martin's betrayal. It was a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had reclaimed her narrative. The final months of the year passed in a flurry of small, joyful moments. Nathan and Emma went on their honeymoon, sending back pictures of sun-drenched beaches and radiant smiles. Liam grew closer to Nathan and even began visiting Emma's family on occasion. Linda focused on herself, taking art classes and fostering new friendships. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that was more than enough. On New Year's Eve, Linda hosted a small gathering. Nathan, Emma, and Liam joined her, along with a few close friends. As the clock ticked toward midnight, they gathered around the television to watch the ball drop. Glasses of champagne were passed around, and laughter filled the room. When the countdown began, Linda glanced at Nathan and Liam standing together, their differences and shared pain now the foundation of a bond neither had expected. She smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reflected the hard-won peace in her heart. 3, 2, 1. "Happy New Year!" the group shouted, raising their glasses. As the room erupted in celebration, Linda felt a quiet sense of triumph. The past was behind them, and the future, while uncertain, was full of possibility. They had weathered the storm, and now, together, they would step into the light. It was finally a new beginning,